The moment I saw the handprints on my daughter's arms, something inside me didn't just break. It went cold, a kind of absolute zero that I hadn't felt since I was pulling security details in a province halfway across the world. I remember looking at her small, trembling frame and realizing that the man I had trusted to protect her while I was deployed had turned into the very thing I used to hunt. I'm sitting here now, in a quiet room with the weight of everything I've done pressing down on me, and I have to ask you straight up, if you found out your own blood was being systematically broken by the person meant to love them, how far would you go to make it right? Was I wrong for the way I handled this? Or would you have burned the world down just like I did? To understand why things ended the way they did, you have to understand who I was before I became a father. I spent 12 years in the special operations community, a world where problems are solved with precision, intensity, and a total lack of hesitation. When I left the service, I thought I had left that version of myself in the dust. I married Sarah, a woman who was far too good for a man with my kind of history, and we had Lily. Lily was my entire universe, a bright, laughing girl who could melt my hardened heart with a single look. But the transition to civilian life wasn't easy, and my career in private security kept me away for months at a time. That was my first mistake, thinking that providing a high-income life was more important than being a physical shield for my family. While I was away on a long-term contract in Eastern Europe, Sarah and I hit a rough patch. The distance, the silence, and my own inability to talk about the things I'd seen tore us apart. We divorced, but it was amicable, or so I thought. Within a year, she had met Mark. On paper, Mark was perfect. He was a high-level executive, wealthy, charismatic, and seemingly devoted to Sarah and Lily. When I met him during a custody swap, he shook my hand with a firm grip and looked me in the eye, promising he'd treat Lily like his own. I wanted to believe him. I wanted Lily to have a stable home while I was finishing my final contracts. I didn't see the red flags then because I was looking through the lens of a man who desperately wanted his daughter to be okay without him. The signs started small. Lily became quieter on our video calls. She stopped talking about her drawings and started asking when I was coming home with a desperation that tasted like copper in my mouth. Sarah told me it was just a phase, that Lily was struggling with the new dynamic, but my gut, the same gut that kept me alive through 3 combat tours, was screaming that something was wrong. I finished my contract early, walked away from a massive bonus, and flew back without telling them I'd be home 3 weeks ahead of schedule. I showed up at Sarah's house on a Tuesday afternoon. Mark's car was in the driveway, but Sarah's wasn't. When I walked through that door, I didn't find a happy home. I found my daughter sitting in a corner of the kitchen, staring at the floor, while Mark stood over her, his face contorted in a mask of pure, vitriolic rage because she had spilled a glass of juice. He didn't see me at first. I watched as he grabbed her by the upper arms and shook her, his voice a low, terrifying growl. That's when the soldier in me came back. It wasn't a slow build. It was an instantaneous flip of a switch. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply walked into the kitchen and placed a hand on his shoulder. The look of pure terror on his face when he realized who was standing behind him is something I'll never forget. I took Lily to her room, locked the door, and then I went back downstairs. I didn't touch him then, not yet. I told him to leave, and I told Sarah that she had 1 hour to get home before I called the police and CPS. But here's the thing about men like Mark. They think money and influence make them invincible. He didn't leave. He threatened me. He told me he had friends in the DA office, that he'd make sure I never saw Lily again, and that a washed-up grunt, like me, stood no chance against him. Sarah arrived, and to my horror, she defended him. She was brainwashed, convinced that his discipline was necessary and that I was the one overreacting because of my PTSD. They kicked me out of the house that night. Using a temporary restraining order, Mark had his lawyer draft up within hours. I was standing on the sidewalk, looking at the window of the room where my daughter was crying, realized that the system wasn't going to save her. I had no legal recourse in the immediate future, no allies in the local police department, and a pair of predators holding my child hostage behind a veil of suburban respectability. I spent the next 48 hours in a motel room, not sleeping, just planning. I used my old skill sets to monitor the house. I saw things that made my blood boil. I saw Mark's temper flare again. I saw the way Sarah shrunk away from him. I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with a jerk. I was dealing with a monster who enjoyed the power he held over those smaller than him. I had to make a choice. I could wait for the courts, which could take months, or I could take matters into my own hands and ensure he never laid a finger on a woman or child again. I knew that if I crossed that line, there was no coming back. I'd likely lose my freedom, but if I didn't act, I'd lose my daughter's soul. So, that's the situation I was in. I was a man trained for war, watching a coward hurt my child while the law stood in my way. I had the tools, the training, and the absolute lack of fear to end it. Before I tell you what I did next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have played it by the book and hoped for the best, or would you have protected your child at any cost? The plan I executed wasn't about physical violence, at least, not entirely. I knew that if I just beat him, he'd win. He'd play the victim, I'd go to prison, and he'd have Lily all to himself. No, I needed to dismantle him. I spent the next week gathering intelligence. I used my contacts from the private security world to dig into Mark's perfect life. It turns out, when you dig into the lives of men who like to bully children, you find shadows. I found evidence of embezzlement from his firm, a history of similar incidents in other states that had been paid off, and a secret life that would make Sarah's stomach turn. On a Friday night, while Sarah was out at a charity event, I entered the house. I didn't break in. I knew where the spare key was. Mark was in his home office, likely feeling very powerful. When I stepped into the room, he reached for his phone, but I was faster. I didn't hit him. I sat down across from him and laid out a folder on his desk. In it were photographs, bank statements, and a detailed list of every person he had ever hurt. I told him that I wasn't there to kill him, though every fiber of my being wanted to. I told him that he was going to sign a full confession regarding his treatment of Lily. He was going to transfer his share of the house to Sarah, and then he was going to disappear. He laughed. He actually laughed. He told me I had nothing, that it was all circumstantial. That was his second mistake. I had spent the last hour rigging his precious smart home system. I played back a recording of him from the night before, the sounds of him screaming at Lily, the sound of the slap, the sound of her sobbing. I told him that this recording was already on a cloud server, set to be sent to his board of directors, the local news, and every parent at Lily's school if he didn't comply within the next 10 minutes. I also told him that if he ever tried to retaliate, I wouldn't come with a folder next time. I'd come with the skills the government spent millions of dollars teaching me. The change in him was pathetic. The alpha male executive collapsed into a puddle of a man. He signed everything. He was sobbing by the time I was done with him. I stayed in that house until he packed a bag and drove away. When Sarah came home, I showed her the evidence of who he really was. Not just the abuse, but the fraud and the other women. It was a brutal wake-up call for her, but it was necessary. she finally saw the monster in the suit. The aftermath was messy. Mark tried to run, but the evidence of his embezzlement was too strong. He's currently serving time in a federal facility where he isn't the biggest fish in the pond anymore. Sarah went through intensive therapy, and we've slowly, painfully, rebuilt a co-parenting relationship based on honesty rather than optics. As for Lily, she's smiling again. It took a long time for the flinching to stop, and even longer for her to trust that I would always be there, but we're getting there. I didn't go to jail because I played the game better than he did, but I live every day knowing how close I came to becoming a monster myself to stop one. In the end, I learned that being a protector isn't just about being the strongest man in the room. It's about having the restraint to use that strength only when it's truly needed, and the wisdom to know how to dismantle an enemy without destroying yourself in the process. My daughter is safe, and that's the only thing that matters. If you found this story compelling, or if you agree that a father's job is to protect his children by any means necessary, please like this video. It helps us get these stories out to more people. Subscribe to the channel for more accounts of justice and survival, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far, or did I do exactly what needed to be done? I'll see you all in the next story.